The studio lights blaze with relentless brilliance, bouncing off polished glass and chrome. Every eye in the audience is locked on the stage, where Hollywood meets Washington in a single charged moment. Tom Cruise leans forward, elbows on the table, that familiar half-smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. His voice cuts through the hum of cameras and the tension of live television. "Do you really believe what you just said?" The audience titters nervously, sensing a challenge, the kind that makes headlines. The camera zooms in, capturing every flicker of expression between two worlds colliding. Jasmine Crockett doesn't move. Her gaze remains calm, deliberate, and sharp enough to slice through the theatrics surrounding her. The hum quiets. The smile on Cruise's face fades slightly, unsure if he's still controlling the moment or if he's just become part of something larger than himself. In a studio designed for applause, the sudden quiet feels like thunder. Even the audience seems to realize it, that the silence isn't hesitation, it's power. Every second stretches. Viewers at home feel the pull, an actor accustomed to command now facing a congresswoman who doesn't need to perform to be seen. He tilts his head, trying again, voice dipping lower. "Come on, congresswoman." "You can't be serious." Still, nothing but that steady look from Crockett. No words, just truth pressing back against spectacle. Across social media, phones light up in real time, flashes of headlines taking form before the segment even ends. Tom Cruise confronts Congresswoman live on air. Jasmine Crockett's silence stops the show. Hollywood meets its match in D.C. The clip spreads before the broadcast even ends. Commentators scramble to replay it, each trying to decode the tension that just flashed across America's screens. What was supposed to be another lighthearted celebrity meets Congress moment now feels like something heavier, a duel between performance and principle. Behind the scenes, producers whisper into earpieces. Ratings spike. The control room glows with frantic energy. Tom Cruise adjusts his jacket, forcing a grin that doesn't quite hide the flicker of unease. He leans back in his chair, ready to turn silence into spectacle. "So," he says, voice dripping with practiced confidence, "you're saying Washington doesn't need people like me? People who actually inspire hope?" Crockett meets his gaze without blinking. "Hope," she replies evenly, "isn't a performance. It's accountability." A ripple runs through the audience, a soft, collective intake of breath. The words land not as a jab, but as a truth too sharp to dodge. Cruise laughs lightly, trying to diffuse it, but his tone slips into condescension. "That's cute," he says, "but the real world runs on people who take action, not speeches." Crockett's composure doesn't crack. "And yet," she says, "so many actions chase cameras instead of causes." The crowd stirs, some clapping, some murmuring. The tension isn't just on the stage anymore. It's in every living room watching, every timeline lighting up with debates and hashtags. The segment, once scheduled as a polite exchange, is now something electric, a cultural mirror reflecting the divide between celebrity activism and grounded service. Online, reactions start polarizing. One side praises Cruise's bold challenge. The other side celebrates Crockett's poise. The comment sections ignite, snippets of the exchange loop endlessly, each one edited to frame a different hero. But underneath the noise, something deeper takes shape. Viewers notice how she never raises her voice, never takes the bait. The more Cruise presses, the calmer she becomes, an unsettling contrast to his rising impatience. He leans in again, eyes sharp, trying to recover ground. "So tell me, Congresswoman, when's the last time you inspired anyone?" A hush. Even the host shifts in the chair. Crockett lets the question hang, as if daring the silence to reveal more than words ever could. "Every time," she finally says, "someone chooses truth over applause." The audience doesn't cheer right away. They just stare, uncertain whether to clap or think. It's the kind of silence that unsettles, the kind that makes people realize they've witnessed something unscripted. Producers exchange glances. They know this moment won't stay contained to one show. It's already bleeding into the bloodstream of American discourse, because this isn't just about a debate anymore. It's about who gets to define inspiration, the one performing it, or the one living it, And as the cameras roll, Tom Cruise doesn't yet know that the game he started to control, the spotlight, is about to turn on him completely. What happens next will change, not just the tone of the interview, but the direction of the entire conversation. Before this moment, Tom Cruise wasn't just a Hollywood name, he was a symbol. Decades of daring stunts, box office dominance, and polished interviews had crafted a legend, the unstoppable performer who made the impossible look effortless. Every smile rehearsed, every pause purposeful. He didn't just play heroes. He marketed them. Clips from his cinematic legacy roll like flashes of mythology, the motorcycle chases, the high-altitude jumps, the charisma that sold courage in 2-hour bursts. For years, he'd blurred the line between character and person until even he seemed unsure where one ended and the other began. To millions, he wasn't just an actor. He was the embodiment of confidence, precision, control. But the internet has a different rhythm, one that doesn't obey studio scripts. When social media crowned him America's last movie star, it wasn't because of reverence. It was nostalgia. The world that once adored spectacle now dissects it. And Cruise, who once thrived under the lights, found himself needing to perform harder just to stay relevant in a culture that scrolls past perfection in a second. So when the producers of the political special invited him, a Hollywood icon beside a sharp, no-nonsense congresswoman from Texas, it wasn't random, it was strategy. Put charisma next to conviction, one exec had said, and you've got guaranteed engagement. Cruise came prepared like it was another movie set. His team briefed him on talking points, pre-planned anecdotes about leadership, inspiration, American grit. The intention was simple: dominate the room with charm. Make headlines without making enemies, but old instincts die hard. He'd built his empire on one principle: always be the most commanding presence in the room. For years it worked. Interviewers melted under his smile. Co-stars orbited his energy. The audience craved his intensity. He was used to winning the frame. Until tonight. When Crockett entered the studio, she didn't project performance. She projected presence. Quiet, steady, unbothered. The more she spoke, the more his timing faltered. Not because she attacked him, but because she didn't play the game. Cruise wasn't accustomed to resistance without aggression. On movie sets, he directed energy like a current. In this studio, her composure absorbed it. That's what rattled him. The more he pushed, the less control he had. And yet behind the arrogance was something more human. Fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear that all the charisma in the world couldn't outshine authenticity in an age that now values realness over performance. Moments from his past flash like warnings. The viral clip of him scolding a crew member on set. "We're saving the industry!" he'd shouted, convinced his passion justified his tone. The interview where he laughed too loudly at his own charm. The countless online parodies that turned his intensity into meme fodder. He'd spent a career mastering control, but control built on performance is fragile. One calm truth-teller can shatter it with a single sentence. So when he faced Jasmine Crockett on that stage, the confrontation wasn't really between a movie star and a politician. It was between two versions of America, the one that worships spectacle and the one that still believes substance can speak for itself. Cruise thought the audience would follow his energy like they always had. He thought he could steer the moment with confidence and charisma. But every attempt to dominate only highlighted the difference between practiced passion and lived purpose. Viewers watching at home sensed it immediately. The subtle unraveling behind the smile. His words, once commanding, now carried an edge of desperation. The camera caught it. The half-second pause before he spoke. The tightening jaw when she didn't react. The forced laugh that sounded more defensive than amused. And maybe, somewhere deep down, he knew it. That the power he'd always relied on, applause, was no longer the same kind of validation. People weren't just clapping for style anymore. They were listening for truth. The moment he challenged Crockett wasn't calculated malice. It was instinct, the old reflex of an entertainer trying to control a narrative slipping out of his hands. But in doing so, he set up his own undoing. Because for the first time, the spotlight he once commanded wasn't just illuminating him, it was exposing him. And when the world watched the exchange unfold, they didn't see the hero from the movies. They saw a man fighting to keep the illusion alive and a woman quietly rewriting what strength looks like on live television. But what Cruz didn't know, what no one in that studio yet realized, was that Jasmine Crockett's story had been preparing for this moment long before the cameras ever rolled. Her journey wasn't scripted, it was earned. And the calm that disarmed him tonight was forged in battles far tougher than verbal sparring with a celebrity. The next chapter wouldn't just reveal who she was, it would explain why she never flinched, because when a woman like Jasmine Crockett walks into a fight, she's not there to win applause. She's there to redefine power. Before the lights, before the cameras, before her name ever trended online, Jasmine Crockett was a woman shaped by grit, grace, and the unglamorous grind of real life. Texas heat, courtroom battles, the sound of doors slamming in her face before she learned how to knock them down with facts instead of fury. She wasn't born into privilege or fame. She was built from resistance. In the streets of Dallas, where neighbors worked double shifts and dreams took longer to bloom, Crockett learned early that confidence without compassion is just noise. She saw people ignored because they didn't speak the right way, look the right way, or come from the right zip code. And that lit something inside her, a conviction that truth doesn't need polish to have power. Her story began not with a spotlight, but a courtroom, the kind that smelled like old wood, tension, and coffee gone cold. She was young then, standing across from men twice her age, armed with a case file, a pen, and an unshakable calm. They'd underestimate her, mistake her soft tone for softness itself. Until she spoke. Until logic hit harder than ego. Until silence fell heavier than any gavel. Every case was a battle for the unseen. The single mother losing her home to unfair fines. The immigrant worker cheated out of wages. The young man mislabeled before he could speak his truth. These weren't headlines. They were the reasons she never learned to back down. She rose through the ranks not by shouting the loudest, but by standing longest. While others rehearsed sound bites, she studied people. She understood the rhythm of injustice, how it repeats until someone breaks the beat. When she entered politics, the critics came fast. Too direct, too different, too much. But she'd heard those words before. They'd been thrown at every woman who dared to lead with both intellect and empathy. She didn't change her tone to fit the room. She changed the room by keeping her tone. On the campaign trail, she walked through neighborhoods most politicians only drove past. No entourage, no theatrics. Just a notebook, a voice, and a promise that wasn't poetic. It was practical. "I'm not here to talk about hope," she told a crowd once. "I'm here to legislate it." And when she won, it wasn't a fluke. It was a statement. A message from the people who are tired of being told to wait their turn. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was armor, because every time someone underestimated her, she learned to turn their assumptions into fuel. She knew that composure is not the absence of fire. It's the art of controlling where it burns. So when she walked into that studio opposite Tom Cruise, she didn't see a celebrity. She saw another man testing her resolve, something she'd faced her entire life. Behind her quiet eyes was the memory of standing in court while senior lawyers mocked her accent. The memory of donors who asked her to soften her image. The countless interviews where hosts tried to bait her into anger just to make better TV. But she never gave them that satisfaction. She learned that dignity disarms louder than outrage ever could. To her, this wasn't just another debate or TV appearance. It was another version of the same test. How to stand firm when someone with more power, more fame, or more privilege tries to knock you off balance. Her preparation wasn't in scripts. It was in scars. In learning to keep her voice steady when people tried to silence it. In mastering the art of the pause, that stillness that forces the other person to hear themselves unravel. The truth is, Crockett didn't come to entertain. She came to represent. Every calm breath she took in that studio carried the weight of every person who's been talked over, doubted, dismissed. She didn't need to prove her intelligence. She'd built her career on it. Tom Cruise had an audience. Jasmine Crockett had a purpose. And that difference was about to matter more than anyone realized, because what she understood, and what the world was about to witness, is that composure is not passive. It's power refined. It's what happens when you know that the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Her story wasn't one of perfection, but persistence. She'd been called names, misquoted, and underestimated more times than she could count. But every insult only reminded her why she stood where she did. Because someone had to show that you can be both powerful and principled, both fierce and fair. And in that studio, beneath the stage lights, that duality radiated from her like quiet fire. She didn't glare, didn't fidget, didn't fold. She waited. Because Jasmine Crockett understood something that most people don't. Silence, when owned, is louder than spectacle, and just as Tom Cruise thought he had the upper hand, as the laughter in the studio tilted slightly in his favor, that same silence began to shift the energy. The crowd leaned in. The air changed. Even through the cameras, viewers at home could feel it, that this wasn't another TV stunt. This was the moment before a storm. Because when Crockett finally decided to speak, it wouldn't just be words. It would be the sum of every fight, every doubt, every challenge she'd ever faced. And when she did, Hollywood charisma would meet something it couldn't act its way through. Truth delivered with grace. The next scene wouldn't just belong to her. It would define her. The studio lights glared brighter now, as if the room itself sensed the brewing tension. Tom Cruise leaned back in his chair, a smile still painted across his face. The kind that walks a fine line between charm and challenge. Cameras framed his every gesture, feeding on the energy. Millions were watching live, waiting for sparks. He tilted his head, voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. So you're saying politics isn't about image? Come on, Congresswoman. The whole system is a performance, isn't it? A few chuckles rippled through the audience. The kind of laugh that follows power, not humor. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her hands stayed folded, her posture still. Silence, deliberate, composed, stretched between them. Tom leaned in again, sensing an opening. You've got a brand now, right? Social media loves you. But let's be real. Do you actually believe what you preach, or are you just playing your role? He said it like a punchline, expecting the crowd to echo his confidence. Instead, the air thickened. The laughter faded. The silence started to turn against him. Jasmine's gaze was steady, not defiant, not angry. Just focused. The kind of look that said, "You're revealing more about yourself than you think." "Tom," she finally said, voice low and clear, "if believing in fairness is a role, I'll play it every day. Because some of us didn't grow up on stages. We grew up in systems that told us to sit down and smile. And we learned not to," the audience murmured. Not laughter this time, but recognition. The tone had shifted, but Tom wasn't done. He doubled down, forcing his grin wider. "That's cute," he said. "But people don't watch politics for sermons. They watch for moments. You know that, Congresswoman. You're here because you went viral, not because you passed a bill." The jab landed like a spark against dry air. Jasmine didn't react, not visibly. But something subtle changed in her breathing, in her stillness. The patience of someone who's seen this dynamic play out 1,000 times before. A powerful man mistaking arrogance for wit. He went on, "Let's be honest. You need attention just like the rest of us. That's what keeps the machine running. Me in movies, you in Congress. Same hustle, different costumes." The audience didn't laugh this time. They didn't move. Even Tom noticed. His rhythm faltered for the briefest second. The split-second awareness that he'd gone too far. Crockett leaned slightly forward. Her tone stayed even, her words measured. "Attention fades, Tom. Integrity doesn't. Some of us are working for more than applause." Her calm landed heavier than anger ever could. For a moment, the room froze, the kind of silence that lives right before a breaking point. Every eye was on her. Every camera zoomed closer. Tom shifted in his seat. "I think you just proved my point," he said with a forced laugh. "You're performing right now, That was the last straw. Not for Crockett, but for the audience. The tension had flipped. What started as amusement was now unease. People were no longer entertained. They were witnessing imbalance. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her composure was beginning to dismantle the very performance that had dominated the stage minutes ago. Every second she stayed silent, Tom filled it, rambling, gesturing, trying to keep control of a scene that was no longer his. His laughter echoed, but it landed hollow, and that's when it happened. That quiet transition the cameras couldn't script. The crowd began to lean toward her instead of him. The rhythm of power shifted. She still hadn't delivered her response, not the full one. But the audience could feel it building. It was in the way she looked at him, patient, certain, unbothered. It was in the way her silence became louder than his. Words, everyone watching, in the studio and across millions of screens, knew what was coming. Something was about to happen that would turn the laughter into gasps, the mockery into awe, because when Jasmine Crockett finally chose to speak again, it wouldn't be to defend herself. It would be to redefine the moment. And in that instant, the star of the show wasn't Tom Cruise anymore. The silence before she spoke was electric, alive, stretching across the room like a held breath. Every camera light stayed fixed on her face, waiting for a flinch, a crack, a sign that she'd been rattled. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Her expression was the same, calm, composed, almost serene. Tom Cruise tried to fill the void again, chuckling to himself, his voice echoing through the uneasy quiet. "See," he said, his grin forced. "Even you know it. Politics is just another movie. You play your part, I play mine. We just sell different scripts." That was his mistake. Crockett leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the table. Her tone was soft, deliberate. "Tom," she began, "you've spent your life mastering scripts. I've spent mine breaking cycles." The audience straightened up, even the crew. There was something in her voice that carried weight beyond words. "You're right," she continued. "I didn't come here to sell anything. I came here because people like me don't usually get invited to these tables, and when we do, we're expected to smile while someone else narrates who we are." Tom blinked. His grin faltered. "But see," she said, her gaze unshaken, "I don't do scripts. I deal in truth. And the truth is, there's a difference between performance and purpose. One needs applause, the other needs courage." A hush spread. The audience wasn't breathing now, just watching. "People think politics is about sound bites," she went on. "But the real work, the hard work, doesn't make the highlight reel. It happens when cameras aren't rolling, when no one's clapping, when no one's trending your name." Tom shifted again, eyes darting toward the camera. His showman's armor was cracking. Crockett's tone stayed measured. "You built your empire on attention, Tom. You gave people moments of joy, of escape, and that's not nothing. But power isn't about who gets the most views. It's about who uses their platform to lift someone else up." The words landed heavy. You could almost feel the weight of them sink into the air. Tom tried to interrupt, but she didn't let him. She wasn't raising her voice, but every syllable cut cleaner than a shout. "You said I play a role," she said. "But I play it for people who can't afford directors or scripts or edits, for families trying to afford insulin, for kids who think justice is a myth, for communities that hear 'wait your turn' every election cycle." The audience burst into quiet applause, not roaring, but firm, unified. The kind of clapping that came from respect, not entertainment. Crockett smiled slightly, just enough to soften the blow she was about to deliver. "And you? You asked if I believe what I say. The answer is yes, every word, because belief doesn't make you famous, it makes you accountable." Tom tried again, half laughing. "Well, that's quite the speech, Congresswoman. Sounds rehearsed." She tilted her head gently, not rising to the bait. If integrity sounds rehearsed, maybe honesty's been off the air too long. The crowd erupted this time. Even the studio crew couldn't hide their reactions. Eyes wide, some shaking their heads, grinning in disbelief. The balance had flipped completely. Crockett leaned back in her chair now, at ease. You know, Tom, the thing about mockery is, it only works when the other person needs your approval. Tom fell silent. Completely. She looked around the studio, her eyes scanning the audience. And I don't. That was the line that detonated across the internet. The live chat flooded instantly. She ended him. Crockett 1, crew 0. This is how you handle arrogance. Clips started circulating in real time, cut mid-sentence, looped, subtitled, replayed. Tom's face, that familiar movie star confidence, now looked unsure. His show had turned into a masterclass he didn't sign up for. Crockett didn't gloat. She just finished her water, calm and graceful. You said everyone's performing, Tom. Maybe that's true. But some of us perform service. Some of us perform humanity. Some of us perform hope, even when the audience isn't clapping. The applause was overwhelming now. No cue cards, no producers needed. It was organic, raw, unstoppable. And yet, amidst the roar, Jasmine stayed still. Because she knew the moment wasn't about her ego. It was about the message landing, about showing, not telling, that restraint could be the sharpest weapon of all. Tom, visibly humbled, gave a slow nod. It wasn't for the camera. It was for her. You've got away with words, he said, almost under his breath. She smiled faintly. No, she replied. I've just had to use them to survive. The crowd fell into stunned silence again. This time not out of shock, but respect. Crockett gathered her notes, preparing to leave. The thing about fame, she said as she stood, is that it ends when people stop watching. The thing about truth? It doesn't need views. It just needs time. Every screen in America froze on that image. The poised congresswoman standing tall under studio lights, the global superstar sitting quietly beside her. Within hours, that clip became digital wildfire. Memes, edits, reaction videos, and breakdown threads dominated every feed. But the caption that spread fastest was simple. The day composure defeated charisma. And for the first time in his long career, Tom Cruise wasn't the most talked about person in the room. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't just answered a question. She had rewritten the meaning of a viral moment. But what came next would turn that moment into something much bigger, something no one, not even she, could have predicted. Something that would shake the internet far beyond that studio, because when the camera stopped rolling, the world didn't stop watching. By sunrise the next morning, the internet was on fire. Every feed, every timeline, every news cycle was replaying the same 10-second moment. Jasmine Crockett's final words, steady and unshaken. The thing about truth? It doesn't need views. It just needs time. That line was everywhere. Cut into TikToks, looping over dramatic music, turned into cinematic edits with black and white filters and slow zooms. It was no longer a political moment. It had become cultural. Clips flooded social media. One edit showed Tom Cruise frozen mid-expression while Crockett's voice played over images of marches, classrooms, and Capitol steps. Another used the headline, Hollywood meets reality, and reality won. By noon, her follower count had tripled. Hashtags like Crockett vs. Cruise, Truth over Theatrics, and Grace Under Fire were trending across platforms. But more than the numbers, it was the tone that stunned observers. The internet, for once, wasn't divided. It was moved. Comment after comment echoed the same feeling. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Meanwhile, talk shows scrambled to cover it. Pundits tried to frame it as a clash between celebrity ego and congressional composure. Late-night hosts replayed the footage with reverence instead of mockery. Even Cruz's own fan pages were filled with reluctant admiration for the congresswoman who never flinched. In the quiet corners of Washington, staffers whispered about how Crockett had just done the impossible. She'd gone viral for being calm. No outrage, no theatrics, no shouting match. Just poise. And it resonated like a shockwave. A clip surfaced later that evening of a journalist asking Tom Cruise about the exchange on his way out of a press event. His answer surprised everyone. "You know," he said carefully, "sometimes the best scenes aren't the ones you plan." He smiled faintly, a little humbled. She handled herself like a pro. Maybe I was the one playing a role that night. That quote alone turned into another viral cycle. Screenshots spread like wildfire labeled "Cruise admits defeat." But Jasmine Crockett stayed silent. No gloating tweets, no interviews, no reactive posts. Just a single statement pinned on her social page. Power doesn't need to prove itself. It just needs to stand firm. That single post, quiet, almost poetic, drew millions of reactions. Artists turned it into digital art pieces. Educators shared it as an example of grace under pressure. Activists used it to remind their communities that dignity still had a place in discourse. By day 2, think pieces were everywhere. The Atlantic called it a lesson in controlled authenticity. Vox described it as the viral antidote to outrage culture. Even conservative commentators, usually quick to attack, acknowledged her restraint. "You may not agree with her politics," one said on air, "but you can't deny the composure." The moment had escaped its origin. It wasn't just about a movie star or a congresswoman anymore. It was about the kind of leadership people were hungry for. Not loud, not performative, but grounded. Meanwhile, footage leaked from behind the scenes of that night's taping, a shaky clip from a crew member's phone showing Jasmine walking calmly out of the studio, greeting staff, thanking them, and leaving without fanfare. The caption under that video said it best: "The calmest storm you'll ever meet." Students began quoting her words in classrooms. "Truth doesn't need views," one teacher wrote on a whiteboard in Texas. Another turned it into a debate topic. Can composure be more powerful than charisma? Somewhere in that unexpected storm of digital noise, something real had broken through. Because for a brief moment in a culture addicted to shouting, someone had won with silence, and that silence didn't fade. It echoed. Even late-night comedians, known for their edge, began using the clip to open their monologues. But instead of jokes, they played her quote straight, letting the audience feel its weight. One host ended his show saying, "Maybe we all needed to hear that." By the weekend, the phrase, "truth has its own volume," became the defining line of the week. Brands used it in ads. Activists painted it on signs. It became both meme and mantra, proof that not all viral moments had to be chaotic. And while everyone else was busy talking, Jasmine Crockett had already gone back to work. No press tour, no self-congratulation. Just business as usual. Her silence became part of the legend, because the internet had seen something rare, dignity that didn't need a mic drop to be heard, and for millions watching, especially those tired of the noise, the spin, the constant battle for attention that felt revolutionary. What had started as a confrontation had evolved into a mirror, reflecting what people were yearning for: integrity that doesn't shout, but still commands the room, and deep down, everyone knew it. Something had shifted. The world had watched an argument, but what it really witnessed was a recalibration of what strength looks like. Days later, the noise faded. The hashtags cooled. The pundits moved on. But something lingered in the air. Not the controversy, not the confrontation, the tone of it. The memory of a moment when restraint had outshined spectacle. People had watched hundreds of debates, endless shouting matches, viral clips that burned bright and vanished. But this one felt different. It wasn't loud, it was steady. And that steadiness stayed. Journalists began calling it the Crockett effect, a quiet power that disrupted the usual script of American virality, where whoever yells the loudest wins the most clicks. For once, someone had refused to perform. And that refusal became the performance everyone remembered. In classrooms, teachers replayed the clip, asking their students what they noticed first, her words or her calm. In workplaces, it sparked conversations about composure and chaos. Even in churches and community centers, people quoted her response as an example of integrity under fire. When a reporter finally caught up with Jasmine Crockett a week later, she didn't brag about the moment. She didn't even mention Tom Cruise by name. Instead, she said softly, "You don't need to shout to be heard. Truth has its own volume. That one sentence captured everything. It wasn't a clapback. It was a creed. A reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes, it listens, it waits for the right second to speak. And when it does, the world hears it. Not because it's loud, but because it's real." Commentators started reflecting on how the exchange exposed something deeper in American culture, our obsession with conflict as entertainment. Every debate, every talk show, every viral argument was built like a boxing match. Who hits harder? Who lands the punchline? But Crockett had broken that pattern. She had proven that silence could stun harder than any insult. For her supporters, it became a source of pride, not just political, but personal. For immigrants, for women, for anyone who'd ever been told they had to shout to matter, she'd shown another way. You don't have to raise your voice to raise your worth. Clips of her quote started being used in motivational edits, behind speeches, even in self-improvement reels. But at the heart of it, the message stayed grounded. Dignity isn't weakness. It's power under control, and that became the moral echo of the entire moment. Because in a world chasing clicks, Crockett's calm had become the echo of integrity. She hadn't just answered a question, she'd modeled a principle. The confrontation had started as entertainment, but it ended as enlightenment. People didn't remember what Tom Cruise asked. They remembered how she answered, with stillness, precision, and grace. It wasn't about outsmarting him. It was about outclassing the moment. Her composure told a story the words couldn't, that authenticity will always outlast theatrics. The internet, usually quick to move on, kept replaying it not for the drama, but for the reminder that maybe the future of influence isn't about being the loudest in the room, but the calmest. And as that realization spread, it planted a quiet seed in the collective psyche. Maybe the American conversation doesn't need another argument. Maybe it needs more people like her. In the final clips circulating online, a fan had edited together Crockett's face with the line, "Truth has its own volume." It faded into black with a final caption that felt like the world exhaling after too much noise. Because sometimes, the loudest clapback is composed restraint, and in that single closing frame, viewers didn't just see a politician or an actor. They saw a mirror. A reflection of what they wanted to believe again, that dignity still mattered, that grace still counted, that integrity could still trend. The viral moment was over. But the message had only begun to rise, quietly, persistently, powerfully. And for millions watching, it wasn't just about who won the debate. It was about remembering what kind of voice they wanted to follow, the one that shouted, or the one that stood firm. The clip that began as a challenge had ended as a revelation. What started with Tom Cruise leaning forward, smirking with movie star confidence, had turned into something far greater, a cultural mirror. In that moment, dignity outshined mockery. Once again, calm had proven more powerful than chaos. As the final edit played out across millions of screens, viewers weren't just entertained, they were moved. Some smiled in pride. Others sat in silence, realizing how rare it is in a world of noise to witness composure so unwavering. The message was clear. The lesson undeniable. Who defines your America? The loudest voice or the most grounded one? It was more than a question. It was a challenge to everyone watching, to choose what kind of strength they believed in. The kind that shouts over others, or the kind that stands tall in truth. Clips replayed across platforms, reactions poured in, and a quiet movement began, one built not on outrage, but on admiration. People were reminded that self-control is not surrender, and grace is not weakness. Because in a culture obsessed with winning arguments, Jasmine Crockett had won something far more lasting: respect. And if you believe that composure is strength, that integrity still matters, that calm can still conquer chaos, then share this story. Let it echo beyond the scroll and the screen. Subscribe for more moments where truth outshines ego, where character, not volume, defines the victory. As the final frame fades, one quote lingers across the screen in simple white text against black. Respect isn't weakness, it's power under control. The studio lights may have dimmed, but the message? It's still shining.